December 9th, 1941. Kriegsmarine Headquarters, Berlin. The conference room's mahogany table reflected the faces of Germany's naval leadership as Admiral Karl Dönitz spread reconnaissance photographs before the Führer. 2 days after Pearl Harbor, with America now officially in the war, Hitler demanded answers about the Atlantic. Mein Führer, Dönitz began, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had commanded submarines in the last war. The mathematics are simple. Britain imports 7 million tons of supplies monthly. If our U-boats sink 700,000 tons per month consistently, Britain starves in 6 months. They surrender in 8. Hitler leaned forward, studying the charts showing convoy routes across the Atlantic like spider webs connecting America to England. And the Americans? What happens when their ships join the convoys? Kapitän zur. Kurt Führer, chief of the Kriegsleitung Operations Division, answered with barely concealed contempt. Our intelligence estimates American shipbuilding capacity at perhaps 200 vessels annually. Optimistic estimates suggest 300. Either way, irrelevant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The room fell silent as Führer continued. The Americans have never been a maritime power. They build automobiles and washing machines. Their shipyards are antiquated. Their workers are undisciplined. Most critically, they lack the skilled craftsmen necessary for warship construction. Gross Admiral Erich Raeder, Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine, added his assessment. The British are already stretched beyond capacity. American entry changes nothing. Their merchant marine is tiny, only 900 vessels. By the time they build enough ships to matter, the war will be over. Hitler nodded slowly. The Americans are shopkeepers, not shipbuilders. They are good at making radios and refrigerators, but ships? He laughed. A sound his generals had learned meant he was convinced. They are bluffing. They want us to divert resources from the Eastern Front. What none of these men knew was that at that precise moment, 12 shipyards across America were already building vessels using techniques that would revolutionize maritime construction. The SS Patrick Henry, America's first Liberty ship, was nearing completion in Baltimore. Another 140 ships were in various stages of construction. Dönitz outlined his strategy. We currently have 91 operational U-boats. I need 300 to guarantee victory. With 300 boats, we can maintain 100 at sea continuously. The British and Americans combined cannot replace 700,000 tons monthly. And if they build more ships than we anticipate? Hitler asked. Impossible, mein Führer, Führer responded. A modern cargo vessel requires 18 months to 2 years to construct. Even if Americans could match our efficiency, which they cannot, they might complete 400 ships annually by 1943. Our U-boats will sink 800. The tonnage war, as it became known, was Germany's entire Atlantic strategy. Sink ships faster than the Allies could replace them. Force Britain to surrender before American industrial might could be brought to bear. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. The Americans lack our discipline, Raeder added. Their workers demand high wages, short hours, comfortable conditions. They strike for better coffee in their canteens. You cannot build a maritime fleet with such workers. Hitler stood, signaling the meeting's end. Focus on U-boat production. Every submarine built is worth 10 surface ships. The Americans will learn what the British already know: the Atlantic is a German lake. As the officers filed out, discussing production schedules, for U-boats, none suspected they had just committed Germany to a race it had already lost. In America, Henry Kaiser was preparing to build a ship in 10 days. Rosie the Riveter was putting on her first pair of work gloves. And 18 shipyards were about to demonstrate that democracy, once mobilized, could outproduce dictatorship by margins that rendered military strategy irrelevant. The tonnage war would indeed be decided by mathematics. But the Germans had calculated with the wrong numbers. February 17th, 1942, Kriegsmarine Intelligence Section, Berlin. Korvettenkapitän Peter Klemmer stood before a drafting table covered with blueprints salvaged from a torpedoed American vessel. U-552 had sent the ship to the bottom off Cape Hatteras, but not before German sailors had retrieved technical documents from the floating wreckage. "Gentlemen," Klemmer addressed his fellow naval architects, "I present the American answer to our U-boats. They call it the Liberty ship." The room erupted in laughter. "This is their emergency design?" Captain Lieutenant Hans Weber asked, studying the specifications. 441 feet long, propelled by a triple expansion steam engine designed in 1890. They've resurrected technology from the Victorian age? Klemmer nodded. The engine produces only 2,500 horsepower. Top speed, 11 knots. Our U-boats can outrun them on the surface. Look at this. Weber pointed to the construction notes. They're using welding instead of riveting. The entire hull is welded. This ship will crack apart in the North Atlantic. German naval doctrine held that riveted ships were superior rivets, allowed flexing in heavy seas. Welded seams were rigid, prone to catastrophic failure. Another officer examined the standardized design. Every ship identical? No customization? This is industrial production applied to shipbuilding. It's absurd. Each vessel requires unique engineering based on intended cargo and route. The technical assessment was damning. Vessel is primitively designed for ease of construction rather than performance. Hull design creates excessive drag. Single screw propulsion is inefficient. Antiquated engine technology. Expected operational lifespan, 5 years maximum. Conclusion: inferior design, prioritizing quantity over quality. Minimal threat to Atlantic operations. Klemmer compiled his report. Americans attempting to build cargo vessels using automobile factory methods. Design is simplistic to point of uselessness. Even if construction succeeds, vessels will be slow, vulnerable, and short-lived. Recommend U-boat commanders prioritize as easy targets. What Klemmer didn't understand was that the Liberty ship's simplicity was its genius. Every part standardized, every section prefabricated. Every worker specialized in one specific task until they achieved impossible speed. Across the Atlantic, Baltimore Shipyard, September 27, 1941. Cranes lifted the final sections into place as the SS Patrick Henry prepared for launch. 244 days of construction. President Roosevelt himself would attend the christening. How long for the next ship? Yard foreman Bill Schwartz asked. Henry Kaiser studied his production charts. The second one? 180 days. The 10th? 105 days. By next year, 70 days standard. Schwartz whistled. The Germans will never believe it. Good, Kaiser replied. Let them believe we're slow. Let them believe we're incompetent. Every minute they underestimate us, we're building another section. In Berlin, Klemmer's report reached Admiral Dönitz's desk in March 1942. Dönitz read with satisfaction. Americans launched first emergency cargo vessel. Construction time, 8 months. At this rate, annual production cannot exceed 50 vessels. Our current sinking rate, 90 ships monthly. Assessment: no threat to Atlantic operations. Dönitz filed the report under Allied construction programs minimal threat. He then returned to planning U-boat deployments for what he called the second happy time, the slaughter of Allied shipping off the American coast. What Dönitz didn't know was that construction time for Liberty ships was falling exponentially. The second ship took 180 days. The fifth took 120. By July, construction averaged 90 days. Kaiser's workers, housewives, farmers, clerks were learning with terrifying speed. In August, Kaiser made an announcement that German intelligence dismissed as obvious propaganda. We will build a ship in 10 days. German naval intelligence officer Korvettenkapitän Ernst Roskopf wrote in his assessment, "Kaiser's 10-day claim is psychological warfare. Physically impossible, even if true, represents publicity stunt, not sustainable production. Recommend ignoring obvious disinformation." The mathematics of German defeat were being written in American shipyards. But the Germans, confident in their technical superiority and convinced of American industrial incompetence, weren't reading the numbers. They would learn, but by then it would be far too late. September 27th, 1942, Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation, Portland. At precisely 12:01 a.m. Welders struck their first arcs as the keel of the SS Joseph N. Teal was laid. Around the shipway, prefabricated sections weighing up to 250 tons waited in precise order, each piece numbered and positioned exactly where the assembly sequence demanded. Henry Kaiser had made his announcement 6 weeks earlier. "We will build a ship in 10 days. German intelligence, monitoring American broadcasts, had dismissed it as transparent propaganda. Korvettenkapitän Ernst Roskopf wrote in his August assessment, "Kaiser's claims represent psychological warfare only. Basic metallurgy prevents such construction speed. Recommend treating as disinformation." But what unfolded over the next 240 hours would shatter German assumptions about American capability. Janet Doyle, a former waitress from Seattle, now known as Wendy the Welder, worked the night shift. She had never held a welding torch before March. By September, she was laying perfect beads at 35 feet per hour, a rate German welders rarely achieved. "I learned one joint," she told a War Production Board inspector. "Just one. I've made that same weld 10,000 times. I can do it in my sleep." Beside her worked Tom Washington, an African-American sharecropper from Alabama who had become a master shipfitter. His precision allowed placement of massive sections within an inch of their marks. Miguel Santos, a Mexican-American whose family had farmed in California for 3 generations, supervised a welding crew that included Norwegian immigrants, Chinese Americans from San Francisco, and white women from Idaho. This coalition, impossible under Nazi racial laws, worked with mechanical efficiency. Hour by hour, the Joseph N. Teal took shape. Bottom hull plates welded in 6 hours, side shells erected in 18. By the end of day 1, observers could recognize the outline of a ship. On day 2, the prefabricated deck house, complete with plumbing and electrical wiring already installed, was lowered into place in a single lift, an operation that would have taken German shipyards a week. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Day 3. The engine, a 140-ton monster assembled in Toledo, was lowered into place and connected in hours instead of weeks. September 23rd, 4:30 p.m. The SS Joseph N. Teal slid into the Columbia River exactly 10 days after her keel was laid. She displaced 14,245 tons and would need only minimal fitting before entering service. In Berlin, the report reached Dönitz's desk October 5th. He read it twice, then summoned his intelligence chief. "Is this confirmed?" "Multiple sources, Herr Admiral, including neutral observers in Panama who watched the launch." Dönitz stared at the document. "Even if true, this is a publicity stunt. They cannot sustain such production. It's impossible." But Kaiser wasn't finished. On November 8, 1942, at Richmond Shipyard No. 2 in California, workers laid the keel of the SS Robert E. Peary at 12:01 a.m. This time, Kaiser had handpicked his fastest workers for a supreme effort. Catherine Glasscock, a former schoolteacher, laid welding beads at a rate that exceeded German naval standards. Richmond Jones operated the main crane with precision that allowed placement of sections within centimeters. Mary Piloseno, a 19-year-old Italian-American, supervised electrical installation teams that wired 5 miles of cable in under 20 hours, November 12, 3:30 p.m. The SS Robert E. Peary was launched 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after her keel was laid. The report reached Berlin in early December. Dönitz called an emergency meeting. "Gentlemen, if these reports are accurate, we must recalculate our entire Atlantic strategy." Kapitän zur See Eberhard Gott, Dönitz's chief of staff, studied the reconnaissance photographs. "Herr Admiral, our aerial reconnaissance shows over 200 Liberty ships under construction simultaneously. Multiple shipyards, each building dozens of vessels. How many are they completing monthly?" Dönitz asked. "Current estimate, 80 to 100 ships per month. By mid-1943, perhaps 140 monthly." The mathematics had shifted. In November 1942, U-boats achieved their best month ever. 729,000 tons sunk. It seemed like victory, but American shipyards had launched 125 merchant vessels that same month. They had produced more tonnage than U-boats could sink. For every ship sent to the bottom, the Americans were building 2 more, and the construction time kept dropping 70 days, 60 days, 50 days. By spring 1943, Liberty ships were rolling out of American yards in an average of 42 days. Dönitz studied his production charts. Germany had 91 operational U-boats in December 1941. Now, November 1942, he had 212. U-boat construction had more than doubled, but American ship construction had increased tenfold. "Even if we sink every ship we target," Gott said quietly, "they're building faster than we can destroy." Dönitz refused to accept it. "Our crews are the best in the world. Our boats are superior. We will adapt our tactics." But tactics couldn't overcome mathematics, and the mathematics, written in the welding shops of 18 American shipyards by workers who had never seen the ocean, were writing Germany's defeat in the Atlantic. May 24, 1943. Wolf's Lair, East Prussia. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz stood before Adolf Hitler's map table, his face ashen. The Führer's fingers drummed on the wood, a sign those present had learned to dread. "Explain the April figures again," Hitler said quietly. Dönitz cleared his throat. "In April, we lost 15 U-boats. In the first 3 weeks of May, we have lost 31 more. Total, 46 boats in 6 weeks. And sinkings? 55 Allied merchantmen." Hitler's hand stopped drumming. "We lost 46 U-boats to sink 55 ships, nearly 1 boat per ship. Jawohl, mein Führer." The silence was suffocating. Generaloberst Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations Staff, broke it. "What has changed?" "Everything," Dönitz admitted. "The Allies have new tactics. Escort carriers provide air cover mid-ocean. Radar on aircraft detects our boats on the surface. New depth, charges. Coordinated hunter-killer groups. But most critically," he paused, knowing this would enrage Hitler, "there are simply too many ships." He unrolled reconnaissance photographs across the table. "These are American shipyards, photographed by long-range Focke-Wulf Condors. Baltimore, 47 Liberty ships under construction. Richmond, California, 61. Portland, 38. In total, we count over 200 vessels in various stages of completion." Hitler studied the photographs. "How many ships did the Americans launch in April?" 140, mein Führer." "We sank how many Allied ships in April?" 64, including British and Norwegian vessels. The mathematics were undeniable. For every ship sunk, the Americans alone were building more than 2 replacements. Add British and Canadian production, and the ratio became 3 to 1. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, present for the conference, attempted deflection. "These Liberty ships are inferior vessels, slow, poorly built. Many will break apart in storms." Dönitz turned on him with barely controlled fury. "Herr Reichsmarschall, My U-boat commanders report these ships in convoys of 50, 60, 70 vessels, all newly built, all carrying full cargoes. Whether they break apart in storms is irrelevant. They're reaching England by the hundreds. He pulled out patrol reports. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Bargston of U-521 reported in April, convoy HX-234 contained 83 merchantmen, 68 appearing to be new American construction. Attacked, sank 2 vessels. Convoy continued with 81 ships. Gentlemen, we're not even making a dent. Fregattenkapitän Günther Hessler, Dönitz's son-in-law and tactical advisor, added grim statistics. To break even merely to keep Allied tonnage from growing, we must sink 1.3 million tons monthly. Our best month was November last year, 729,000 tons. We've never come close to the cert. Required rate. Hitler turned to the window, staring across the East Prussian forest. You recommended recalling the U-boats from the North Atlantic. Temporarily, mein Führer, until we can equip boats with new technology. Acoustic torpedoes, snorkels, radar detectors. How long? 6 months, perhaps 8. Hitler spun around. In 8 months, the Americans will have built 1,000 more ships. You assured me the U-boat was invincible. From the Atlantic, the reports flooding into Kriegsmarine headquarters told a story of psychological collapse. Captain Lieutenant Heinz Schaefer of U-977 wrote, "The convoys are enormous now. 80, 90, sometimes 100 ships. We might sink 1, perhaps 2, if lucky, but it's like bailing out the ocean. For every ship torpedoed, 3 more appear on the horizon." Oberleutnant Zur C. Herbert Werner, commander of U-415, sent a patrol report that naval censors tried to suppress. Morale critical. Crew knows mathematics. We sink ships. Americans build more. Simple arithmetic says we've already lost this war. Men volunteer for patrol, knowing odds of return are 1 in 3. They go because they're German, but they no longer believe in victory. The May losses, which would ultimately total 41 U-boats, lost with minimal sinks, broke the back of the U-boat force. Germany had built 1,162 U-boats over the entire war. In a single month, they lost nearly 4% of total production. Dönitz made his decision. On May 24th, he ordered U-boats withdrawn from the North Atlantic. Hitler accepted the recommendation with ice in his voice. "You will resume operations when ready. The U-boat remains our only weapon against American production." But both men knew the truth. The tonnage war was over. Mathematics had rendered courage, skill, and technology irrelevant. The Americans were building ships faster than they could be sunk. Each Liberty ship represented 42 days of American labor. Each U-boat represented 6 months of German production, and America had 18 shipyards working around the clock. As Dönitz left the Wolf's Lair, he paused to study the photographs one final time. Rows of identical hulls, each containing 14,000 tons of cargo capacity. Liberty ships. The name was cruelly appropriate. They were ferrying the means of Germany's defeat across an ocean the Kriegsmarine no longer controlled. Richmond Shipyard No. 2 roared like a living creature, a city within a city, pulsing with light and motion. 93,000 workers moved through its endless sheds and scaffolds, sparks flying from welding torches that cut through steel and night alike. The smell of oil and metal filled the air. It was not the perfume of elegance, but the scent of victory under construction. Emma Martinez arrived each dawn, her lunch pail swinging from one arm and her welding mask in the other. A former waitress from Fresno she had joined, the Rosie, ranks after her husband shipped out with the Navy. She was one of tens of thousands of women who had stepped into what had once been called men's work, only to discover that skill cared little for gender. Her welds were strong, her timing perfect. Supervisors said she worked like 2 men. She smiled when she heard that it meant they still hadn't learned what one determined woman could do. A few bays over, Dorothy Luck ran one of the giant cranes that lifted entire hull sections into place. Before the war, she had been a piano teacher. Now she operated a machine that could swing 60 tons of steel through the air with the grace of a bow across strings. "I just play a different instrument," she liked to say, her hands wrapped around the levers that made warships rise. Thomas Washington, a tall black man from Mississippi, oversaw one of the assembly line welding crews. He'd fled the cotton fields for a defense job that promised more than survival. Here, he found something rare, a paycheck that matched his effort, and a crew that respected his craft. "This here's not just a job," he told his men. "It's our answer." He meant to the world that said they couldn't build, couldn't lead, couldn't matter. Every rivet he placed into the belly of a Liberty ship was a rebuttal to centuries of exclusion. Across the Atlantic, German factories churned too, but with a darkness of a different kind. Their labor came from the camps, from occupied nations, from the enslaved. Starving workers dragged themselves through 12-hour shifts under the whips of guards. Innovation there was born of coercion. In America, it was born of freedom, urgency, and pride. The contrast could not have been starker. At Richmond, workers ate in integrated cafeterias. In the childcare centers, Mexican, black, and white children played together under the same roof. Healthcare clinics treated weld burns and fatigue without question of who was supposed to be there. For many, it was the first time they'd seen an institution that worked for everyone, a vision of what America might yet become. The shipyard ran around the clock. Prefabrication made miracles possible. Sections of hulls, decks, and cabins were built separately, then welded together like the pieces of a puzzle. Where shipbuilding had once taken months, now a Liberty ship could slide down the ways in as little as 4 days. The Kaiser yards called it victory through volume. Others called it simply the human wave. 18 shipyards across the country operated simultaneously, each one a heartbeat in the great machine of production. Welding had replaced riveting, saving time and material. Conveyor systems and overhead cranes moved sections from one bay to another. It was Henry Ford's assembly line reborn in steel and salt air. Every worker knew the rhythm. Sparks flew, hammers rang, sirens wailed as launches christened new ships at dizzying speed. The workforce earned more than any industrial generation before them, but more important, they produced more. Productivity rose not just from machines, but from morale, purpose, and the unshakable belief that every inch of steel they shaped was another life saved at sea. When the first Liberty ships joined the convoys, German radio mocked them as ugly and slow. But the jokes faded when the statistics arrived for every U-boat sunk. 5 more Liberties replaced the tonnage. Emma, Dorothy, and Thomas didn't need medals to know what that meant. The ships they built kept the lifeline to Britain alive, fed the troops at the front, and carried the promise of freedom across oceans. They were the human wave that Nazism could never match, not because of what they built, but because of who they were. Women, immigrants, people of colour. The very souls Hitler's ideology said were inferior had become the engines of the world's greatest arsenal, and as each Liberty ship slid into the water, cheered by crowds who believed they could outbuild death itself, the idea of America imperfect, struggling, hopeful, took form in steel. On the 6th day of June, 1944, the German soldier staring out over the cliffs of Normandy saw a sight that froze his heart. The sea, the entire horizon was black with ships. "There are too many," he whispered to no one. "The sea itself is moving." Below him, 6,939 vessels filled the English Channel. Battleships, destroyers, transports, landing craft, and tugs. It was not a fleet, it was a continent in motion. Never in all of history had so much steel and will converged on a single morning. Each ship was a product of factories that had learned to defy arithmetic. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States built 2,710 Liberty ships, more than twice the number of all German submarines ever launched. For every one U-boat that slipped into the Atlantic, 2 new American cargo ships took to the sea. The mathematics of victory had become industrial, not tactical. In every category, the story repeated. Aircraft, 300,000 built. Tanks, over 88,000. Trucks, more than 2 million. Ammunition, billions of rounds, crates upon crates stretching from the Alleghenies to the Pacific docks. Germany's production, even under Albert Speer's desperate reforms, could not compete. The German economy, brutal and centralized, relied on conquest to sustain itself. The American economy, free and decentralized, multiplied through ingenuity and scale. By 1944, the United States' gross domestic product had reached levels unthinkable just 5 years before, larger than that of Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. It was not merely a question of numbers. It was a transformation of human effort into unstoppable momentum. Factories that once built automobiles now built tanks. Refrigerator plants built machine guns. Typewriter manufacturers made rifle parts. Even small-town workshops produced components that ended up on B-17 bombers. Every rivet, every bolt, every shell was a vote cast against tyranny. The German defenders on D-Day did not see statistics. They saw the result, the living proof of what happens when a nation's industrial heart is set to a moral purpose. The sea carried not only soldiers but welders, machinists, and riveters in spirit. Back in Berlin, Speer read the reports and knew the truth. "We were buried," he later admitted. Buried under numbers, under machines, under the weight of an enemy that could build faster than we could destroy. No amount of discipline or design brilliance could change the outcome. German tanks might be superior in engineering, but they came in hundreds. The Allies came in tens of thousands. Luftwaffe pilots could claim aces tallies, but American factories replaced every lost plane before nightfall. The United States had created not just an arsenal, but a civilization of production. Its workers, women and men, white and black, immigrants and sharecroppers' sons, had transformed industry into a weapon as powerful as any bomb. When the waves of landing craft hit the beaches, the Liberty ships anchored offshore became floating supply depots, their holds packed with trucks, fuel, and food. Every round fired that day had travelled across an ocean built by American labour. From Richmond Shipyard No. 2 to the beaches of Normandy, a line could be drawn from Emma's welding torch to the thunder of naval guns, from Dorothy's crane to the tanks rolling ashore, from Thomas's assembly line to the endless columns of trucks pushing inland. It was the arsenal unleashed a storm of steel, spirit, and purpose, so vast that it made tyranny seem small. And in the smoke of Normandy, beneath the Black Sea of ships, the final verdict of the industrial war was already written. Freedom had learned to build faster. The courtroom in Nuremberg's Palace of Justice was cold that November morning in 1946. Hermann Göring sat in the defendant's dock, his once corpulent frame diminished by prison rations, his Luftwaffe decorations replaced by a simple grey suit. American prosecutor Robert Jackson approached with a manila folder containing documents that would strip away the last vestiges of the Reichsmarschall's carefully maintained facade. "You were aware," Jackson began, "of the production figures from American shipyards?" Göring's jaw tightened. For months, he had maintained his arrogant demeanour, but these numbers represented something he could not dismiss with rhetoric. The documents showed what German intelligence had reported throughout 1943 and 1944. American yards were launching Liberty ships faster than U-boats could possibly sink them. At the campaign's height, German submarines achieved a 70% casualty rate among their own crews. 28,000 submariners died of the 40,000 who served, drowning in steel coffins as Allied convoy escorts grew more numerous and deadly with each passing month. Admiral Dönitz, Jackson continued prosecuting this campaign even after these figures became known. Why? The question hung in the air. Karl Dönitz, sitting 3 seats down from Göring, stared straight ahead. He had sent boys to sea in the campaign's final months, some barely 18 years old. cramming them into Type XXI U-boats that never had time to complete shakedown cruises. They sailed, knowing the odds, knowing that American production had transformed the Atlantic from a hunting ground into a graveyard. The captured German naval archives told the story Jackson now presented to the tribunal. In January 1943, German intelligence estimated American merchant ship production at 140 vessels per month. Dönitz's staff dismissed the figure as propaganda, impossible to believe. By June, they had revised their estimates upward, but still concluded the numbers must be exaggerated. The actual production exceeded even the most pessimistic German calculations. Dr. Douglas Kelly, the American psychiatrist assigned to evaluate the Nazi leadership, had spent hours with Göring in his cell. In those private sessions, stripped of courtroom theatrics, the Reichsmarschall had been more candid. "We knew by 1944 that we had lost the production war," Göring told him. "But what could we do? Stop fighting? Hitler would never permit it. So we continued, knowing it was futile." Kelly's notes, later published, captured Göring's assessment of American industrial capacity. They made warfare into a form of mass production. It wasn't brilliant strategy or superior tactics. They simply built more than we could destroy, and they did it faster than we imagined possible. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, provided even more damning testimony. In his cell, Speer had compiled statistics from memory, checking them against captured documents. "We calculated that if we could sink 750,000 tons of Allied shipping per month, we could strangle Britain," he testified. "We never sustained that rate after mid-1943. Meanwhile, American production alone exceeded 2 million tons monthly. The mathematics became impossible." The industrialists who had supported the Nazi war machine, now facing their own trials, offered similar assessments. Friedrich Flick, the steel magnate, spoke of visiting American factories before the war. "I saw the Ford River Rouge plant in 1938, he testified. "I reported to Hitler that if America entered the war and applied these methods to military production, we could not win. No one wanted to hear this." Jackson presented one final document, a British Admiralty report on 2 Liberty ships, still in service, sailing commercial routes in 1946, the SS John W. Brown and SS Jeremiah O'Brien had survived the war's most dangerous convoys and continued carrying cargo as if their extraordinary origin story meant nothing at all. They were tools, built for a purpose, still serving that purpose after the emergency had passed. The prosecutor's summation tied these threads together. The defendants speak of destiny, of will, of racial superiority, but in the end, they were defeated by shipyard workers in Baltimore and Portland, by welders who had never heard of the Kriegsmarine, by a democratic nation that transformed its industrial capacity faster than tyranny could comprehend. They were outbuilt, outproduced, and overwhelmed by the basic arithmetic of free people working toward a common purpose. Göring was convicted on all counts and sentenced to death. He cheated the hangman with a cyanide capsule hidden in his cell. Dönitz received 10 years for his role in the Peresdalit, U-boat campaign and the war crimes associated with it. Speer received 20 years, serving every day of his sentence. But the lasting legacy of the tribunal was not just individual accountability. It was the recognition that World War II had been decided not primarily on battlefields but in factories, shipyards, and assembly lines. Democracy had outproduced tyranny, and the Liberty ship program stood as the clearest symbol of that triumph. The vessels themselves, welded together in days rather than months, had bridged the gap between American industrial capacity and European desperation. They had kept Britain alive, supplied the Soviet Union, and delivered the armies that liberated a continent. 2 of those ships still sailed in 1946, their welded hulls proof that emergency construction could outlast the emergency itself. They represented something more than naval architecture or industrial efficiency. They represented the decisive advantage of a free society, the ability to mobilize, innovate, and produce at a scale that dictatorship could never match. The final accounting required 3 months of work by U.S. Maritime Commission statisticians, cross-referencing shipyard records, Navy reports, and captured German documents. When the numbers were compiled in March 1947, they told a story almost too vast to comprehend. 2,710 Liberty ships had been built between 1941 and 1945. Each vessel displaced 10,500 tons and could carry 9,140 tons of cargo. The average construction time peaked at 42 days, though the record remained the SS Robert E. Peary at 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Total cost for the program: $13 billion, approximately $190 billion in modern currency. The workforce peaked at 650,000 workers across 18 shipyards. Henry Kaiser's Richmond yards alone produced 747 Liberty ships, nearly 30% of total production. The vessels employed prefabrication techniques that reduced skilled labor requirements by 60% compared to traditional riveted construction. Women comprised 27% of the workforce at peak production, with some yards reporting female workers performing every job from welding to crane operation. The U-boat campaign statistics provided the counterpoint. From 1941 through 1945, German submarines sank 2,828 Allied merchant vessels, totaling 14.1 million tons. Impressive numbers, representing tremendous courage and sacrifice by Allied merchant seamen. But American and Canadian shipyards built 5,777 merchant ships during the same period, totaling 54 million tons. The Germans would have needed to triple their sinking rate to even match new construction, let alone reduce total Allied tonnage. The mathematics became more stark when examining monthly figures. In November 1943, U-boats sank 300,000 tons of Allied shipping, their lowest monthly total since 1941. That same month, American yards alone delivered 1.9 million tons of new merchant shipping. The ratio never improved for Germany. By 1944, American production had so far exceeded losses that merchant ships were being mothballed, held in reserve for possible future conflicts. The Victory Ship program, initiated in 1944, demonstrated that American yards could improve upon success without sacrificing production volume. These vessels were faster, more fuel-efficient, and better armed than Liberty ships, yet construction time remained under 60 days. 531 Victory ships were completed before war's end, proving that mass production and quality improvement were not mutually exclusive. Concepts. Soviet testimony, released in 1946 after years of secrecy, revealed the full scope of Lend-Lease shipments. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, in his memoirs, wrote, "Without American trucks, we could not have moved our artillery. Without American steel, we could not have produced enough tanks. Without American food, we could not have fed our army." General Secretary Nikita Khrushchev, in later years, acknowledged, "If the Americans had not helped us, we would not have won the war. One-on-one against Hitler's Germany, we would have lost." Those supplies reached Soviet ports aboard Liberty ships, sailing the deadly Murmansk Run, where German aircraft and submarines concentrated their attacks. Of 721 ships attempting the Arctic convoys, 85 were sunk, an 11.8% loss rate. But 636 made it through, delivering 4.4 million tons of war material that kept the Eastern Front supplied during its darkest 2 hours. The Pacific Theatre told a similar story. Liberty ships delivered supplies to Australia when invasion seemed imminent in 1942, transported entire divisions to Pacific Islands, and maintained supply lines across 8,000 miles of ocean. They served as emergency transports during the Philippines campaign, ammunition ships at Okinawa, and floating warehouses throughout the island-hopping campaign. The final accounting included non-combat roles. 197 Liberty ships were converted to military purposes: troop ships, hospital ships, repair vessels, and even floating aircraft maintenance facilities. 12 were converted to colliers, carrying coal to keep forward bases supplied with fuel. 8 became prisoner of war transport vessels, repatriating captured soldiers after Germany's surrender. Total Liberty ship losses: 193 vessels sunk by enemy action, 27 lost to marine casualties, and 12 lost to unknown causes. 232 ships from a program that built 2,710, a loss rate of 8.5%. Higher than peacetime standards, but remarkably low for vessels that sailed through the war's most dangerous waters. The bridge between factories and victory had been built of welded steel, assembled not merely by machines, but by the millions of hands that turned American industrial capacity into the war's ultimate weapon. Every spark from a welder's torch, every rivet driven into a steel plate, and every ship launched into the grey waters of the Atlantic became a symbol of democracy's endurance and ingenuity. In the vast shipyards that stretched from California to Maine, ordinary men and women farmers turned welders, teachers turned riveters, and housewives turned inspectors produced the ships that carried freedom across oceans. Democracy had outproduced tyranny. It was not just a triumph of machinery, but of morale, organization, and shared purpose. The dictatorships of Europe and Asia built their strength through coercion. America built hers through conviction. The Liberty ships, more than any other wartime creation, embodied this truth. They were not elegant vessels, nor were they designed to last. Each one was a floating compromise between speed and simplicity, built from prefabricated sections that could be welded together in as little as 42 days. Yet from these pragmatic designs emerged an industrial miracle. Over 2,700 Liberty ships were launched, an armada of endurance that kept Britain alive, carried soldiers to distant fronts, and brought them home again. 75 years later, 2 of those humble ships still sail, the SS John W. Brown and the SS Jeremiah O'Brien. Preserved as floating museums, they are more than relics, they are time machines. Their decks still echo with the footsteps of those who once manned the guns and guided convoys through submarine-infested waters. Their engines still thrum with the rhythm of America's wartime heart, built for a lifespan of 5 years yet enduring for nearly a century. They remain physical proof that in the struggle between free peoples and oppressive powers, victory belongs not only to those who fight, but to those who can build faster than destruction can tear down. The Liberty ships stand today as monuments to the workers who welded the bridge between industry and victory, ordinary citizens who, when history demanded it, transformed their nation's factories into the arsenal of democracy and changed the course of the 20th century. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.